like, subscribe, notifications.
Degenesis Artifacts is a rules expansion to the Degenesis role-playing game. The game itself is published by Six More Vodka out of Germany and now enjoys an international following in 5 and going on 6 languages. The setting takes place almost 600 years in the future, in Europe as well as Super-Saharan Africa. Humanity faces threat of annihilation from all sides by meteor-born invaders that have mutated plants, animals, and even time and space itself. It also faces self-destruction as everyone is split into clans and cults that are mostly at odds with each other. There are a few things I want to point out about this video. This is the third of 3 deep dive videos that I'm doing about Degenesis. The first one covers Primal Punk, the setting book. The second one covers Catharsis, the game's rule book, which also contains a lot of setting content. This third video will cover artifacts. I was asked by Six More Vodka to do this series in a promotional capacity, but they were very laissez-faire as far as content. As usual, I'll include my honest opinions at the end of the video. This video will only cover Degenesis as it is presented in this book, Artifacts. The Degenesis library continues to expand with new setting lore being added layer by layer each year, but just covering artifacts here in this video shouldn't be an issue since it's mostly self-contained rules expansions on offer. You can freely download all of the PDFs right now from their website. Premium quality printed versions are also available for order. Artifacts is sold as a hardcover book with a glossy, dark cover, gold foil lettering, and gold page edges. It runs 240 pages, and the pages themselves are stitch bound, and the colors on each page are vibrant and crisp. Incidentally, this entire book goes for the white letters on black background, which only works because the print job is nice enough that the black ink is very dark and there is no ink bleed with the letters. If the quality were any less, white on black would be an issue, but it is quite readable here. This is a very sturdy, heavy, premium feeling book, just like all the Degenesis books, and as I've mentioned in the previous videos, the idea is that you can download the PDFs for free and then give the game a try or a read, and if you want to support Six More Vodka, you can do so by buying these rulebooks in print. I've included an exclusive discount code in the video description below. Artifacts presents 12 chapters that each contain a modular expansion of the game's rules in one way or another. They each touch on one aspect of the game or another, and they range from enhancing the roleplay side of things to addressing purely mechanical solutions to problems. I have my own playstyle, and I'll discuss which of these 12 chapters are my favorite and which aren't at the end of the video, but first I'm going to run through each of the chapters and explain what the book actually gives you.
Legacy.
Legacies are offered to players at character creation, and they are just that, backstory that forms a part of a character's background. There are 43 legacies in the chapter, and each of them is composed of 4 parts: prerequisites, a mechanical bonus, an explanation of the legacy itself, and a drawback, which is almost always a mechanical penalty of some sort. Some of the legacies don't have any prerequisites, but most of them do, and they come in the form of concept, background rating, character's age, or some stat requirement. That alone makes the free Degenesis Online character creator worth its weight in gold, by the way, since it will only present to you the legacies that your character qualifies for when you punch in your build choices. As for the legacies themselves, they are all very fascinating from a roleplay perspective. A player can choose up to 3 legacies at character creation, which almost seems like an overload of baggage in both RP and mechanics, so maybe start with just 1 if you're new to this. Just like the potentials in the core rules, there isn't any overbearing sense of balance with these bonuses and drawbacks, but that's what makes them so fun. For example, Repugnant provides 2 automatic successes to every domination skill roll when used to intimidate others, which is extremely generous, but you take a -1 success to almost all charisma skill rolls. And then there's the roleplay baggage that the player has to shoulder. In the case of Repugnant, they are horribly scarred. In most cases, the roleplay baggage found in the drawback is pretty significant and may in some cases put players in a straitjacket over the long term. The book doesn't say as much, but I'd be inclined as a GM to allow players to eventually shed a legacy over time if there was narrative justification.
Scars.
Groups of players that choose their legacies together in a coordinated fashion can end up creating some very compelling group backstories right out of the gate. This fact is not lost upon the authors, who mention working with the GM to combine legacies into a cohesive group story. The book goes a step further with alignment. If players are willing, they can all choose a single alignment. There are 6 listed alignments which really characterize a story arc that embodies a group's purpose. The GM awards an immediate 3 ego point replenishment to everyone in the group if they achieve any given milestone connected to their alignment. But the meta design of a group can go even deeper. Certain character concepts are in affinity with certain alignments, while other concepts are in aversion. For every character who has the right concept in a given alignment, they contribute a bonus to everyone in the group. These bonuses stack, and if everyone in the group has the right concept, the group achieves constellation, which is a huge unique bonus that everyone gets to enjoy. Likewise, if one or more characters in the group have a concept that is in aversion to the group's chosen alignment, bonuses are rolled back in kind. This chapter also introduces a common point pool amongst the group called scars. When the group is following their alignment and complete a related milestone, a scar point is earned. One scar point can be spent by anyone in the group to replenish one ego point, or 3 scars can be spent to receive a trigger on a successful roll. When scars are actually spent, they also contribute towards a group's infamy rating. Infamy is the measure of a group's influence, renown, and reputation at large, and it ranges from 0 to 6. After a group spends 10 scar points, they graduate to level 1 infamy. Once they've spent another 20, they are level 2. And after spending another 30, they are level 3, and so on. There's a short narrative description of each infamy level that will definitely color the group's interaction with human NPCs at almost every turn, but the infamy level can also boost character background ratings in some cases, and that bonus can get pretty hefty at higher infamy levels. An alignment is essentially a story arc, and no story lasts forever. If the characters complete their alignment mission or goal, they need to figure out if the alignment is to continue or if a new alignment is to be chosen. The book doesn't really say so, but I'm guessing this conversation about where to go could take place in character or out of character, or both, depending on your table's playstyle. If a group decides to play members of the same cult, they are awarded a few bonuses for achieving so-called collective status. Each cult has its own cool name for a collective, and a few of them are limited to certain ranks. A corps of Spitalians will likely be mostly Famulancers escorting an epigeneticist or pharmacist, while an Anabaptist pack is usually either all orgiastics or all ascetics. But there are a million ways to deviate from those suggestions, of course.
Survival.
If you found that the core rules of Degenesis did not do enough to address top travel speed of humans on foot, on a mount, or in a vehicle, or that same top speed when pushing themselves to the limit, or travel speed modifiers as levied by difficult terrain, well, you're in luck. Artifacts covers a lot of these kinds of bases here, including formula for sleep deprivation, discomfort penalties, it calls malice, and related recovery, as well as a smattering of survival gear descriptions. I think that these kinds of rules are really great to have on the books in any game of this type, but I would caution that the GM either learn this stuff by heart or have it on a cheat sheet, since waiting around for them to look up stuff like this can be a real drag during sessions.
Health.
Players who have an attack roll that yields triggers can choose to spend them on complications, specifying the injury that they cause to their victim. There are 2 kinds, flesh wound complications and trauma complications, and they each have different costs in triggers. Some of them are straightforward, while others have some special mechanics attached to them. Any of these complications only go away when the flesh wound or trauma is healed. Out of all these complications, infections gets 2 full pages of extra mechanics for recovery, treatment, and even finding the right herbs out in the wild. The chapter also addresses a couple of finer points about encumbrance and describes several performance-enhancing drugs that each come with some hard mechanics. Burn addiction gets a bit more specific, and the mechanics of cravings and withdrawal are enough to make you not ever want to mess with it. When proper withdrawal sets in, quote, all other feelings lie dormant. Morals, relationships, and faith are distant and unimportant memories. This would just be a drag to roleplay, if anything. Out of the 10 pieces of medical equipment detailed at the end of the chapter, several stand out as being particularly illuminating of the cult to which they are associated. In classic Degenesis fashion, the gear of the game can be very tightly woven into the setting.
Combat.
This chapter tightens up aimed shot rules when the target is smaller than a human, usually it being a part of a human or human-sized entity who is partially exposed from behind cover. And regarding cover, there's a relatively simple rule set for how to reduce the structural integrity of different kinds of cover depending on what it's made of. Any given material has an armor rating that initially reduces any incoming damage. Then any damage that gets through reduces its structure points. Any damage that exceeds the structure points reach the target. Identifying an environmental weak point in a combat situation is a combination of 2 roles, instinct plus perception and intellect plus engineering, and sneak attacks are clarified a bit. The chapter also provides a list of modifiers for the difficulty of running away from a fight. Psyche plus faith or willpower versus the difficulty will determine if a combatant can successfully flee. There are also a slew of small rules added to the heap, but only things that clarify and focus the mechanics of combat rather than change the feel of combat in any significant way.
Energy.
Storable energy in Degenesis is used mainly for two things: running the lights and fueling weapons. But this chapter goes a lot further than just identifying all of the world's known types of energy storage and establishing their units. It gets into the nitty-gritty of how long it takes to transfer or extract quanta of energy from one tech-level storage device to another, and there is risk of electrocution, of course. Petro, which is more or less combustible oil or some crude form of gasoline, has a few delightfully specific mechanics that come with it, including how to armor up a pressure tank full of it, what it takes to blow up that pressure tank, and exactly what kind of damage that exploding pressure tank will do. You know, the important stuff. Coal is given a bit of love too, but if you want to blow something up with it, the idea is that you have to block the vents of a coal-powered steam engine, and it's a bit of a process. Generating energy, such as through solar panels, water mills, or petro or coal generators, is touched upon, and there's some light math involved if you want to calculate efficiency and transfer, but these rules are probably the least complete in the book.
Economy.
The concept of concessions being auctioned off by the Neo-Libyans once a year is mentioned in the core rulebooks, and concessions are given a lot of importance. But in Artifacts, you actually get the full rundown of what they are and how they work. Basically, the Neo-Libyans define parcels of land out in the world and assess their value with a number of factors. Then, once a year, they auction off the rights to work and improve that land, usually through heavy loans that they provide at 10% interest. These bits of land probably aren't always theirs to auction, but that's completely besides the point. The concession trade is the beating heart of the Neo-Libyan cult. I'll just say at the start that from a gameplay perspective, the concession system is fully functional and intriguing, but it's more of a long-term layer of the game that adds detail to the background of any given adventure, since it's largely land leasing and accounting rules. Concessions are ultimately defined by their current and maximum rating. Those two ratings are each based on the sum of 6 factors. Each of these factors has a possible sub-rating of 0 to 6. A GM can randomly roll or choose from these 6 tables to create a concession, or a player in-game can roll Psyche plus Cunning plus their ally's background to assess a concession, where every 2 successes on that roll can add 1 possible rating point increase. The Great Auction that divvies out these concessions is held once a year and is where Neo-Libyans bid on thousands of different concessions. The most valuable ones are auctioned first, and there's a mad scramble for them. Auctions are happening simultaneously, and there's a lot at stake for everyone, but usually at your game, you're probably going to be focused on just a single auction for a single concession. Bids are done with background points of all 6 types, and whichever of those points are used in a successful bid, they can only be used towards the concession for the next year. Furthermore, in a successful bid, the bidders are on the hook for up to 1 million dinars of debt, since they have to actually pay for the lease. If they choose to borrow from the Bank of Commerce, which they are strong-armed into, then they have to pay that debt back plus 10% interest in a year. The book provides some restrictions for how much you can borrow from the bank. Fortunately, the running of the concession is relatively simple. There are a few simple rules to determine whether or not a concession is improved upon, and those can be made about once every 2 months of in-game time. Then, income points are established at the end of the year, and you get to see if you made any profit. You get a slight advantage in winning your concession for the following year at auction, but even if you lose the concession, you still owe the bank whatever you borrowed from them.
Awesome.
This chapter adds a few more weapon qualities: gruesome, stun, panic, and single loader, as well as a weapon lanyard mechanic. It also digs into how black powder is handled. Specifically, how powder can be overloaded or underloaded into a gun on purpose, with risk of the barrel violently exploding on you, of course. A number of fighting maneuvers and weapons have been added, divided by category, and these run the gamut of tech level from 1 to 5. It's certainly nice to have the whole array of firearms to choose from, but it bears mentioning that ammo is scarce in the world of Degenesis, and hunting down specific calibers for your cool battle rifle might not even be worth it.
Primal Ingenuity.
Enter the most gruesome and disgusting chapter of the book: how to harvest body parts from psychonauts for magic items and materials. First of all, the psychonaut needs to be dead, so good luck with that. Then you need to make an intellect plus legends roll against the legends rating of the part you're trying to harvest. If you pass that, then you need to roll intellect plus medicine and get 10 successes within a certain number of rounds, depending on the volatility of the body part. The idea here is that psychonauts and their various parts very quickly decompose, and if you don't harvest fast enough, the body part either disintegrates or loses its special properties. Each of the 5 types of aberrants has their own special bits and parts that do specific things. The effects of these harvested parts are pretty straightforward, but the details of how to cut them out and the potential fallout from using them are truly gross and fascinating. We're talking eyeballs, lobes of the brain, glands, ligaments, tongues, body fat, and livers. It's a fun read. If you notice the standard market prices on these parts, you'll realize that maybe some groups will want to hunt psychonauts down for profit. This chapter describes 10 different ways that the people of Degenesis can find and detect psychonauts, although to be fair, a lot of these methods are used to detect them in order to avoid them. Either way, the items and methods described are interesting because they further depict a world that feels lived in, where human ingenuity has found a way to survive with what has been given, even if it's not pretty. Finally, there's a grab bag of odd ends that are mostly derived from primer beasts or phenomena. These can and should be woven into an adventure since they are fascinating and firmly connected to the setting. One of the things I found of particular interest was the Unbreakable, an ultra high-tech item that has been retrieved from the future through the warpage or time-space anomaly in Hyperspania. Unbreakables can be anything, but the weapons and armor are of most interest because they can flip the script on any battle. Due to time travel logic stated in the book, the item cannot be destroyed because it must survive into the future in order to be retrieved in the first place. Just owning something so powerful will put a target on your back, which is part of what makes it fun.
Potentials.
As I mentioned earlier, the potentials in Degenesis are not meticulously balanced, but rather err on the side of thematic coherence and cool theatrics. The core rules provide 6 potentials for each of the 13 cults, and this book adds another 9 each. It ends up being a huge number of potentials to choose from, but a lot of the new potentials have some steep requirements and might be out of reach at first. At least in true Degenesis form, they each embrace the look and feel of the cult and sometimes confer incredible power. Battalions might be able to bring back the dead, although they have less than a minute to do so. Chroniclers have a chance to hack into virtually any security system. Helvetics can come back from the dead out of sheer will. Neo-Libyans have a chance at reducing the interest on a loan to 0%, and on and on. It's by far the most complex chapter of the book and broadens the mechanical field of play by a huge margin. Artifacts in this game are incredibly rare and valuable items from the tail end of the bygone era, which have the potential to do incredible things. Finding any of these items is up to the GM, but players actually being able to activate the artifact comes down to an intellect plus artifact lore roll. There is a chance that the artifact will blow up in their face, but if they manage to meet or beat the activation difficulty rating for the item, they get to use the thing. In some cases though, the artifact has a derelict tag, which means that on a failed activation attempt, the thing is permanently destroyed. This long list of ultratech brings into sharp focus the game's theme of futurism mixed with mid or post-apocalyptic grunginess. The items are largely weaponry and spyware, with a few outliers that do other strange things. There's a bit of a cyberpunk element with some of these artifacts too, in that they dig into your flesh and cause damage even as you use them properly. That's always a fun surprise for players.
Memetics.
The core books contain copious mention of how Palers were indoctrinated with the power to levy memetics on people in order to harm or control them. This chapter goes into depth on how that works in the game. Memetics originally refers to units of cultural knowledge or information that is passed in a broad social context and which can spread in a population almost like a virus. In Degenesis, memetics act more like forced hypnotics in a one-on-one setting. Sleepers are able to unleash memetics by employing the nanites in their blood to change their bodies or brains in subtle ways that achieve the result of manipulation in the target. Normal humans can also perform memetics, and they're treated as potentials, but they have a far narrower range of choices in terms of what they can do. Each memetic power or protocol has a rating that represents the difficulty the sleeper needs to meet or beat on a particular roll. Their action number or number of dice they get to roll on that attempt is the number of flesh wound points that they're willing to spend on the roll, with the maximum being their cascade number. Cascade number refers to which century after the Eschaton a sleeper was awakened and released into the world. There are 100s, 200s, 300s, 400s, and 500s, and their cascade rating is 1 through 5. Thus, a sleeper, depending on their rating, can sacrifice 1 to 5 flesh wounds on a memetic protocol roll. They can also sacrifice more flesh wounds to enhance or escalate a protocol. The sleeper can also reduce the flesh wound cost of escalations by having any of 5 connections. The target gets a free chance to resist the protocol by making a mental defense roll against the rating of the protocol itself. If the target is hostile to the sleeper, their defense roll difficulty is lowered significantly. When it comes to the memetic protocols themselves, there are 3 categories: association, obsession, and compulsion. Each protocol has a specific difficulty rating, main effect, duration, and cost and escalation. The escalation for each of these is always just a lengthening of the duration or strengthening of the effect. Alright, so here are my thoughts on Degenesis Artifacts. I'll start with these memetic protocols. This is just a personal thing, but I try to stay away from things that remove a player's ability to control their character for long periods of time. When it comes to the memetic protocols that the sleepers use, some of them really leave me scratching my head. A few minutes loss of agency is one thing, but some of the powers last for hours or even days. As you've seen, the entire book is done with white text on black background, and it works with the physical book. It really is perfectly readable in print, but this mode does have a couple of drawbacks. One, it can be hard to read on screens if you're not adjusted to this sort of extreme dark mode. And 2, say goodbye to the notion of printing out the PDF at home unless you like murdering toner cartridges. There are a lot of things I like about how the book presented the new rules. For one, each of the 12 chapters are modular, meaning if I don't like the memetic stuff, for example, I can easily ignore it. None of the chapters are really integrated into the game in a way that makes it hard to leave them out, and that's great. The legacies at the start of the book are such potent fuel for the imagination when starting a new character, and the fact that each comes with some hard mechanics really gives them a lot of weight. The bonuses are just as powerful as the drawbacks, and it just widens the game for players in a really interesting way. And if you're starting at a higher level, the legacies can jumpstart your backstory and get the ball rolling in that respect. All of the rules associated with group dynamics, including alignments, constellations, collectives, and the Scar point pool, are really well thought out. They add a separate layer of gaming to the RPG that is completely optional, but if used, can really bring a lot of cohesion to a group from start to finish. And they can also make the GM's job easier by informing them of what the players are looking and hoping for. I'm continually impressed with the quality that Six More Vodka employs with their printed matter. Their whole business model hinges on giving away quality content digitally and then offering the best quality physical books for those who want them. So naturally, these books are all of collector's edition caliber quality. I love the fact that the online character creator includes legacies and will only allow you to select ones that your stats qualify you for. And as with all aspects of the web app, you get a pop-up info box when you hover over any of these legacies so you can reference them quickly. Degenesis is free to play, which means you can go download Artifacts right away for free. The frequency of illustrations is not as high in Artifacts as it is in the core books, but every illustration that you get in this book is killer, which is par for the course actually. When it comes down to it, there's no way I could play Degenesis now without legacies and scars and harvesting Psychonaut parts. Huge swaths of this book are instantly classic in my opinion, and indispensable to the game. I'm not quite sure how the Neo-Libyan concessions would play out at the table, but in the end, they're really just another creative backdrop to help you tell an incredible story. Thanks as always for watching. This is Dave signing off. See ya.